political smear is definitely one of them that does not get enough attention. It's like the Democrats are throwing mud and smearing and lying and having perjured testimony, and then they
that
say
Brett Kavanaugh thing is insane.
And then they say about Kavanaugh, well, he's got mud on him. Well, yeah, you guys screw it. I mean, there's been nothing on his judicial temperament. That's a big issue. Does the judge have a good temperament? Meaning, does he make good decisions and not get emotionally involved in a case like if it's a child murder and say, oh, you're horrible, you're horrible. No, a judicial temperament means nice, even keel, good judgment, good emotional state, and there haven't been any questions on that or his judicial decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just fabricated testimony of a liar who worked at Stanford in a CIA office.
Right.
I mean, that's unbelievable. So, I got to tell you something. In the September newsletter, I did something unusual. I described the symptoms of a fascist state.
Mm.
And I described what a fascist state was. And basically, it's a conglomeration of the political offices, which are very, very many, in combination with major corporate sectors for the purpose of furthering the goals of a crime syndicate that links them all together with no interest whatsoever in the popular sentiment or well-being.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically capture of a government by a crime syndicate with major corporate elements, including the news, energy, pharmaceutical, medical, military, and recently a very obscene element has become more evident, and that is the Hollywood, the entertainment, the music and movie industry.
Mm-hmm.
I like to point to some absurd movies like Zero Dark 30,
Mm-hmm.
which was the fabrication of the Osama bin Laden capture. It was actually nominated for best movie. Didn't win it, but it was nominated. The fact that it was nominated means that the corruption is deep. Why was Syriana involved in the Academy Awards and George Clooney? Why did he get an Academy Award for that? Why did Argo, which was about the escape from Iran, why did that have an award for Ben Affleck on Best Director? That's absurd. There's so many. Why is there a movie on Deepwater Horizon out last year with Mark Wahlberg that did not mention one time the name Halliburton, which might have had a role in sabotage?
Mm-hmm.
Then there was another Mark Wahlberg movie called Patriot Day, about the Patriot Day. About 3 years ago, there was a staged terrorist incident at the Boston Marathon. So I reason that some of these actors further their career by cooperating on the propaganda films. And that's a very easy point to defend. But, we've got, included in this special report for the Hadwick letter in September, I gave approximately 100 examples of symptoms for the fascist state. And there are four main ones that I'd like to point to that are truly ugly and bear emphasis, warrant emphasis. Big Pharma was, the major pharmaceutical companies were granted immunity from prosecution and liability due to damage caused by vaccines. Why was that? Why are they given immunity for paralysis cases and for autism? Well, Bush Jr., I call him Bush Jr., Baby Bush, W. George W. Bush included in the 2005 Bankruptcy Act, and very little publicity was given to it. Big Pharma got immunity for vaccines. The second example is chemical fracking firms have no requirement to reveal their toxic contaminant chemicals that are inserted into the U.S. groundwater system. Well, why is that? Halliburton was guilty of, and admitted, dumping 1.3 billion gallons of toxic wastewater into the California aquifers, and they didn't even get an EPA investigation. Environmental Protection Agency sat on their hands. Third example is QE, the monetary policy from the Fed. It's basically Wall Street banker welfare. It follows the stolen $700 billion by TARP funds, which was set up by Congress to enable credit to be amply supplied for the economy, but the Wall Street banks stole it and used it to cover their preferred stocks. And the fourth example of the fascist state is the ugliest of all: direct narcotics production, distribution, and money laundering with the banks. They produce it in Afghanistan, they distribute it to the NATO air bases, and they do money laundering all through the London and New York banks. But the real meat of my point is the 100 or more examples of a fascist state. And, I don't have any list of priorities, but, just a few that come to mind are chemtrails poisoning our air, reporters being murdered for unsavory stories, anyone who's about to testify against the Clintons for either their foundation or campaign violations for the Democratic National Committee, they end up dead. NGO groups like Black Lives Matter, they're funded by Soros and other groups.
Yeah.
You have murders of 30 different people who are witnesses of the grassy knoll for the Kennedy killing. You have falsification of 9/11 incident for the World Trade Towers. By the way, that was $100 billion in bearer bonds stolen at the World Trade Center Bank, along with $100 billion worth of gold, along with $100 billion worth of diamonds. And all the official stories never even mentioned the World Trade Center had a bank. Yeah. Why is that?
Right.
It was the biggest private bank outside of central banks in the globe, in the entire Earth globe world. And then you got, a lot of the, really strange, queer stuff coming from the Obama administration. ABC News executive Ian Cameron married to Susan Rice, who's the National Security Advisor. CPS President David Rhodes is the brother of Ben Rhodes, the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications with Obama. ABM News correspondent Claire Shipman is married to former White House Press Secretary Jay Carney. I could go on.
Mm-hmm.
Why is UPS doing midnight runs, dropping off dozens and dozens of unvetted Muslims all across the United States? I mean, this is what I call Arab human garbage dumping. Why did the Traffic Safety Administration under Homeland Security, why were they ordered to buy a lot of different machinery? It doesn't work too well at the airports, but the company is owned by Michael Chertoff. Okay,
so let me ask you this, Jim. You're listing all of these effects of a fascist system, right? Like, why hasn't America notice and make a change? Like, what's suppressing us? Is it that we still feel like the American dream is still alive? Kind of give us some reasons why this fascist state is able to continue on doing what they're doing.
I call it socialism creep. You just get one item after another, which in and of itself is not all that important. But as a group, it means that you got another plank to the fascist state, another 10 or 12 different features, and another plank to the fascist state. The people they're noticing, but they're not noticing the big picture. They're noticing individual pieces. There are a lot of people who are very angry at the Occupy Wall Street movement, which caused the FBI and Homeland Security to take action against them like a terrorist group. Okay, there are a lot of people who are upset by the U.S. government's reaction. But
so is us electing Donald Trump symptomatic of waking up, saying, wait a minute, like we need to try something different? He may not be the most stable individual, but hey, we might as well give it a try. The left has failed us, the right has failed us. Is that kind of symptomatic of that waking up?
I think so. Yes, I think so. In fact, I got into an argument with my brother several years ago. He was happy, for instance, that the Democrats took over the White House in '08. And I said, well, but it's basically the same narco-president lineage. He said, huh? I said, well, Papa Bush, Bill Clinton, Baby Bush, Obama, they're all narco-presidents. He said, right. What do you mean by that? I said, they all come from the Langley roots. They're all narcotic addicts, and none of them submitted their medical report as required for entry into the White House. He said, I don't know what you're driving at. One, you had Papa Bush and Baby Bush, they're Republicans, and Clinton and Obama were Democrats. And I said, you just don't get it. What happened to the two murdered kids near the rail tracks who got wind of what was going on and saw some of the drops? I mean, these are narco presidents involved deeply in narco trafficking, and they're representatives of the Langley political party, not the Democrat Republican. I said, it's so much simpler, John. What you have is the fascist political party, which has perhaps 70 to 80% of the Congress, the fascist group. I don't care, Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter.
Right.
Do they allow react? Do they allow Langley to continue what they're doing? Do they allow the NGO groups to foment civil war? Do they allow Langley to stage terrorist incidents? Do they continue with this entire military endless war? I mean, are they participating? Because the other party, the other 20%, they're what I call the populists. So you have fascists versus the populists. And right now, I think, even though Trump is a Republican, he's kind of like a new age Republican. He's a Republican in search of cleaning up the system. And there are plenty of Republicans who don't want to clean up the system. And that qualifies them as being members of the fascist party. I mean, I'm amazed that Americans don't even know what fascism is. I've actually conducted an experiment close to 50 times in the last 10 years. I asked someone who's like a tourist, I meet him over a beer or a dinner, he's a friend of a friend, and we're going for a walk. I said, how do you like the fascist creep going on in the United States? They have no idea what I'm asking. I said, do you even know what fascism is? And they said, yeah, Nazi Germany. I said, no, I didn't ask. I asked for what a definition might be of fascism.
Right.
And they stumbled again to come up with an example rather than a definition. Americans don't know what fascism is. I talked with my father 2 months ago, a very strained conversation. I mean, full of stress. I said, Dad, whether you like it or not, the United States is just sliding to become a fascist state. He said, Jim, why do you say such absurd things? I said, well, Dad, shall I mention 10 symptoms of the fascist state? And you can dispute each one item by item? And he said, no, I'd rather not go there, Jim. But why do you engage in such conversation? And I said, well, why do the Americans so eagerly and avidly and so ignorantly avoid the topic? So now we have a topic to avoid. And my father's getting on. He's actually pressing 100. And
wow.
He doesn't give a shit about this stuff.
I wouldn't either.
He's wearing his, World War II cap on July 4th and displaying his flag. And I said, one time I really got him pissed off a few years ago. I said, Dad, it's July 4th. You know there's a new flag out there. And it's got, instead of the red stripes, it's got blood. Instead of the white stripes, it's got lines of cocaine. And instead of stars, it's got swastika. And he said, Jim, that's horrible. There are a lot of people who died for the country. I said, I know, and they should probably turning in their grave for what they're seeing now in this fascist. It's really quite disgusting. I said, Dad, we went into Afghanistan under false pretense.
Yeah.
We supposedly went in there to build a Chevron pipeline. You remember that? With Condoleezza Rice NSA director Condoleezza Rice, former Stanford Stanford professor of political science. We actually talked about doing mineral mining in Afghanistan and shipping out the wealth and building their economy, nation building. All we did was we built up 18 of the 20 Taliban tribes, recruited them to produce heroin, poppy, and it's shipped out to the NATO bases. Here's a funny little fact now. You know, the United States, with its NATO allies, attempted to murder President Erdogan of Turkey. And the news puts a nice face on that. They say there was an attempted coup. No, it was an attempted murder, attempted assassination of the head of state. If it weren't for the Russian jamming of the Aegis targeting system, Erdogan and his family would have been killed. But now we've got a new problem. And there's an easy solution, but it's causing logistics challenges. The first stop after Afghanistan and at one point in the former Yugoslavian region, the first stop for the heroin was in Sirlik Air Force Base in Turkey. And that's no longer available. And for those who think that they're going to exit NATO, well, you know, it's not that simple. And for those who think that they're going to just disconnect in Turkey from all U.S. and Western arms contractors, well, that's not quite the case either, because there's a great need for parts. I'm talking about jet aircraft parts. You don't abandon your airplane. You take them over, but you still need parts. Anyway, so there's they're moving away from NATO to be sure, but the challenge is, where does all that heroin go? Well, it's going to Piano, NATO base in Italy, and it's going to Ramstein, NATO base in Germany. Don't worry, all the heroin will end up in the United States streets with big profits for Langley, the narco Bush family, and Big Pharma. Now there's Big Pharma's getting into hot water from the millions and millions of prescriptions of opioids.
So speaking of the opioid issue, Jim, I was in the Bay Area, San Fran, a couple of weeks ago for a crypto conference meetup out there. And I had been out to San Fran once before, and, I noticed the issues they had with homelessness and stuff. But this time around, it seemed even worse. It was very extreme. And it was just sad to see that everyone there just walked around these individuals and acted as though they didn't exist. And I saw so many people on the streets, living on the streets. Many of them, after I found out later that many people in San Fran opt to live on the streets because it's just a better situation for them. It costs too much to actually have a formal home. Is this an issue? What's causing this? Why are we seeing such a high opioid epidemic and homelessness issue? What's going on?
Well, the homelessness issue is the result of the sluggish recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah, sluggish recovery is what I call Reich economics definition of a rather persistent, pervasive, and nasty, endless recession. The Reich economists call it the sluggish recovery. People lose their jobs, and they double count part-time jobs, and they don't count people who are out of work, and they end up with a 5% unemployment rate. You gave me an article to read by Nomi Prinz from Zero. And right in the opening paragraph, the economists proved, I don't know if Nomi is a man or woman. I'm very sorry. I'll just call it Nomi as being a woman.
Yeah, she's a woman. Yep. Okay.
In the opening paragraph, she gave it away that she's not a very good economist, and she's what I call a Reich economist, R-E-I-C-H.
Gotcha.
Coming from the fashion. She said that even though we have a very low, historically low unemployment rate. Oh, really? Is 22.5% low? Well, no.
Well, they're not counting U6.
Well, they're not counting people who are out of work. It's so simple.
Yeah.
They're counting only people who don't receive No, they're only counting people who receive unemployment insurance. So once you're 99 weeks from now, you're no longer unemployed. You're nobody.
Yeah, you voluntarily decided, oh, I'm not going to look for work anymore because I can just not work, right?
This unemployment situation is really horrendous. And California has another distinction. I believe they released a number of people from their hospitals who were mentally deranged because they simply did not want to pay for their care anymore. So they end up on the street.
There are
Here's something that I learned from a couple of people who wrote to me in my contact us for the hat trick letter, Golden Jackass, contact us. They said that more and more the homeless are turning down certain, not all, certain food kitchens, food, what do you call it, soup kitchens. They're loosely called soup kitchens, but they're free meal centers.
Right.
Some of them are getting a reputation as being a place where if you go in, you might disappear.
Oh, wow.
So the word is out for certain free food soup kitchens that the homeless are being abducted. And I believe they're in FEMA camp. I believe they're being exterminated. I can't back this up. It's just what I suspect.
Right. Or they could be taking some of their organs, correct? They could be doing that as well.
Let me give a preface to that. If you are a homeless person, you've been out of work and you're living on the street for 2 years, you're not in good physical shape.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go to the FEMA center after being abducted in a food kitchen, a soup kitchen, free food center, if you end up in the FEMA camp, you might be getting yourself 3 square meals a day, some health care, some, vitamins, a little bit of exercise, put some meat on their bones. 6 months later, back to good health. It's time to harvest the organs.
Yeah.
These FEMA camps might be a place where they're taking the homeless, putting them back in shape, and then grabbing their organs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, organs, just for simple napkin math. A kidney's worth about $25,000. A kidney is worth also about $20,000. I don't know what the heart and lungs are worth, but they're certainly, I think, more than that. Mm-hmm. So a homeless stock who wanders into a food center soup kitchen might get abducted, ends up having a pretty nice time in Indiana or Idaho at a FEMA camp, and then suddenly you don't see him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
After several months, when it looked like he was doing pretty well, after a few months stay, and just getting his act together and starting to speak clearly and read some books and play some basketball. Okay, anyway, it's a very, very ugly, controversial topic, but you can be assured that as vocal as the group politically is for Social Security recipients, the group of homeless are the exact opposite, with no voice in Washington whatsoever.
Right.
So anyway, it's all part of this creeping fascist state, but I don't believe this recovery is for real. I don't think we've really done any better than a -2 recession.
So let's talk about that, Jim. Let's talk about that. It's now 10 years, right, since the so-called economic collapse that we had in 2008, which started probably before 2008, 2006, 2007. But we really saw everything kind of come to a head in 2008. Where are we? I feel like we've gone nowhere. Gold is kind of just flatline, but we've had this melt up that you talked about years ago. I remember saying that we would have a stock melt up. Where are we today, and how can we be assured that tomorrow or a year down the line that this thing is going to change and turn around for the better for us, as far as getting out of debt and cleaning up our books and all of that? Is that even going to happen? Am I kind of being too optimistic here?
Oh, I think you're very optimistic. We've got to go through a crisis. Let me give a preliminary item. Most people who are even decently well studied will say that the subprime mortgage bond problem was festering in '05 and '06. And it just came to a head in '07, started to break down, Fannie Mae broke down, and then we had Lehman died of a financial failure. Well, that's a rough cut of events that's really not too accurate. It gets the gist, but it's not very accurate. Greenspan in '01 advised people to borrow against their mortgages, and he was going to lower the rate, and he wanted households to refinance their mortgage. He started the problem in '01. That's when the subprime mortgage problem began. Right. He gave free license to Wall Street to go ahead and approve mortgages that didn't even remotely have the proper underwriting. There was no legal oversight of the MERS, the Mortgage Electronic Registry System, in which titles for properties were used on a multiple basis for multiple mortgage bonds. Okay, but if you're looking for the trigger for this, it's something that came from China. Back in '99, there was the independence of Hong Kong. It involved many parts. It involved an inducement where the Western companies, Western nations, promised to do significant foreign direct investment into China. That included Japan. I mean, Japan now has an offshore labor problem, much like the United States does with Mexico. Cheaper labor, cheaper overhead in China compared to what they have in Japan. Okay, so there was lots of FDI, foreign direct investment, and for 2002 and 3, total of $23 billion by U.S. corporations investing in China. Okay, fine. At the same time, the Chinese leased a few thousand tons of gold to the United States bankers. And to back it up, they weren't stupid. They knew the United States was not honorable. So they had what they called, or what I call, a macro income tax secure stream bond. A macro bond based by the secure stream of income tax receipts by the IRS. And the Chinese weren't comfortable with receiving that bond either. They wanted collateral, and that was the JP Morgan headquarters complex.
Yeah, okay, I remember that. Mm-hmm.
And we defaulted on the lease. The Chinese came in and said, okay, fine, we're going to start the process to take over the JP Morgan collateralized headquarters. That took place around 2014, slow process. But the Chinese did something else in '05. They said, we're going to sell Fannie Mae bonds and focus on treasuries. Why is that never mentioned pre-Lehman? It lit the fuse. Fannie Mae went downward spiral. 2 years later, it had a failure. That was '05. The failure came in '07. It was realized in '08. Okay, the Chinese went further. In 2010, they said we're going to get rid of our long-term treasuries, and we want to focus on short-term treasuries. Read between the lines. They were done dumping Fannie Mae bonds, and they wanted to go to shorter maturity treasury bonds, treasury bills that would mature without the need to sell. And that would be the U.S. government's problem in rolling them over. Okay. Then Bernanke issued Operation Twist, sometimes called QE 2.5. That was to focus on the Chinese dumping of long-term treasuries, and the Fed admitted that they were helping out in buying those long-term treasuries so that China could focus on their short-term treasuries. All right, so China lit the fuse on the subprime mortgage bond problem, that mortgage finance problem. It was more than just bonds, it was portfolios of mortgages. The MERS database was never prosecuted for corruption. Wall Street stole the TARP fund of $700 billion. We're dealing with a crime scene of fascist king-size proportions. Okay, are we ever going to get out of this? We've had 10 years of the so-called GFC, global financial crisis. I was almost laughing a few years ago when I started seeing GFC all over the place. It's crisis spawned by Lehman. Oh, by the way, Lehman didn't die. They were killed.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't just have a failure.
And that's they died because of from what I understand, Jimmy, they didn't want to bail out the guys in the savings and loans crisis in the 90s, right?
That's
That,
part of it.
that
Yes.
was kind of payback.
More controversy regarding action taken against Bear Stearns. So it was the S&L 1980 crisis, but it was also Bear Stearns a couple of years earlier.
Mm.
That's how they killed him. Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan bought a bunch of mortgage bonds from Lehman, which was the Wall Street specialist in mortgage bonds.
Mm-hmm.
And Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan never paid for them. So Lehman died. Now, if you have a shipment of cars, I mean like a boat full of several hundred cars, and the importing company, let's just say it's Ford Motors. I like Ford because Ford is a Satanist. The family is Satanist. If Ford does not pay for this boatload of cars, and they take the cars, they take delivery but don't pay for them, then the maker of the car is going to have a very serious financial event
Mm-hmm.
and disruption. Okay? So, are we going to get out of this? Not so easily. Trump is dealing with a lot of things. I don't want to get into the full Trump story because it is enormously complicated. It's got many, many sides. He's got a good side, he's got a steamy side. To see the steamy side, all you have to do is look at the details of the two recoveries from bankruptcy. Okay? Now, very few people realize that the Rockefeller, John David Rockefeller, like 120, 30 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
where did he receive money? He received it from the Rothschilds. So the Rockefeller empire had a creditor in the Rothschilds. Where did Trump have his creditor? It was Goldman Sachs. So why is Goldman Sachs running the Department of Treasury under the Trump administration? Well, easy.
Makes sense,
One
right?
is-
Yeah.
Go ahead, pardon me?
No, I was saying that makes sense. Yeah. This is.
Okay. Two reasons, I think. One is Goldman Sachs helped to bail out Trump when he had bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
The second is that Goldman Sachs has been in charge of the derivative complex in its operation with J.P. Morgan for the last several years, ever since I think the Rubin participation in the 90s with Clinton. J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs have been running the Department of Treasury ever since the 90s. So we're talking 20 years. You can't say, okay, you're out. We're going to bring in some fresh blood, some fresh honest blood. That's how you tank the whole system. You need to continue in the corruption, or else you have a failure of nuclear financial proportions. So Goldman Sachs is still in the room, in the Trump cabinet room. It's still there. Are we going to get out of it? We need to get out of it. I got an interesting feedback the other day from somebody who said to me, Jim, you outlined the problems and why this whole situation is turning into a systemic breakdown and a global rejection of the dollar, but you don't offer very many solutions. And I said, sure I do. You kidding me? I'm talking about the need to reindustrialize the United States economy with almost every single interview I do. I talk about the need for 20 to 30,000 new businesses every year, repeatedly every year, for probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years in order to build up the export capacity to relieve the trade deficit for the United States economy. I talk about how these companies would be in free trade zones with forgiven income taxes and forgiven property taxes for a 3-year period, maybe extend to 5. I talk about solutions all the time.
Yeah, yeah. So do you think with the tariffs that Trump put in place, is that helping that? Are we going to see that that like resurgence of us making things, being a country that makes widgets? Like, are we going to get back to that point, that manufacturing wealth? That's where the wealth is, right? when we make something.
Right.
Are the tariffs going to help with that, or are there some other unforeseen? I see it's so complicated to me. I can see it go both ways. I can see it backfire on us, but I can also see it possibly working out where it really forces a lot of these big companies to come back home and make their products.
Well, first of all, you have to look at the trade tariffs and reindustrialization as a multi-step process.
Mm-hmm.
First, you have the trade friction, tariffs, and you get retaliation, and you get escalation. What is the immediate effect that has been felt in the U.S. economy? I've talked to a number of clients. The effect that they see is more than 10% increase on prices.
Yeah, I've got a client I sat down with about a month and a half ago, and he said his prices are going to jump 35%. He deals with directly with China. He's basically a fab. He does fabrication. So, yeah, it's going to affect him.
Okay, so we're seeing the cost effect right now, and we've been seeing it for a few months.
Mm-hmm.
And how they exactly alter the the radical increases in prices to claim that we're still in a 2% price inflation environment. It's absolutely ridiculous, ludicrous, and astonishing and shameful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've got a constant 8 to 10% price inflation for the last 10 years. Just take a look at the Chapwood CPI index. Take a look at the Clinton-era definition of CPI that John Williams and the Shadow Government Statistics put out. They're running at about 9 to 10% right now, given the 1980 definition of CPI. So you can change the definition, and you get a better, lower CPI.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Focus now on the increased price structure. It's all across the United States economy. Now, one thing that I've noticed about economists in the last 20 years of doing my trade, and that involves several years before the newsletter was launched in 2004, is that most American economists fail miserably in one particular area. I'm not talking about, CPI and, gross domestic product and joblessness statistics. That's their basic flaw. They buy the government statistics, they accept it, and they run with it, and it's stupid. I don't buy any of them. We've got 22% unemployment, 10% price inflation, and minus 4% or so GDP negative growth. Okay. The areas that they fall down on is what I call the feedback mechanism. They would say, all right, well, if you increase the tax rate 1%, you're going to get 1% more. I'm sorry, you're going to get 1% more tax revenue. Increase the tax rate 1%, you get 1% more tax revenue. Doesn't work that way.
Right.
Doesn't work that way at all. But that's how they have their government budget statistics working. What it does is ignores the entire disincentive. If a company sees, oh gosh, next year there's 1% price, 1% tax rate increase. Let's not expand in that one area out of 3. Less economic growth. The feedback loops are everywhere. When you go to 0%, here's a very paradoxical one. When you go near 0% for CDs at a bank, a certificate of deposit, and you offer like a lousy 1%, whereas before you offered 4 or 5, there's less money in the banks to lend. So they turn down car loans, not so much because they don't, oh gosh, it's hard to explain. There's ample money available to lend, but smart lenders won't do it because they don't want to take the money from the Fed. They'd rather use their own depository fund. Okay, that has really gradually gone away. But if you have savers, it's very not well known. Oh gosh, it's hard to describe this quickly. There are far more investors of CDs than there are borrowers for car loans and home
Mm.
additions. There are far more pensioners who rely on CDs than there are people who buy cars on loan and doing a room addition.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, lower the interest rate, you don't stimulate the economy. You put a wet blanket on the economy. It's the opposite. The feedback loop is negative on the economy for low interest rates. There's no stimulus at all. It's the exact opposite. The stimulus is in the financial market. The bond market, they got this, what they call the Fed valuation model. If interest rates decline, all the price earnings ratios can rise in an inverted way. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the biggest forces, there are two big forces pushing up the stock market. One is the low interest rate, which dictates through the Fed valuation model, invert the interest rate, and you get the appropriate price earnings rate. So that's one thing. But the whole low interest rate is providing tons and tons of free money for the Wall Street banks, by way of, the New York Fed, which is basically a crime syndicate conduit for Wall Street. The New York Fed oversees the funneling of money to Wall Street where they buy illicitly stock. The Fed does not have a charter to support the stock market. The Fed does not have a charter to support the crude oil market, but they're doing both.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we going to get out of this? Yeah, but we've got to go through a crisis. And I think.
And what does that crisis look? What does that look like? So complex. I can't figure out what does the next crisis look like.
It looks like U.S. isolation and global rejection of the dollar, refusal to accept Treasury bills for trade payments, and workarounds whereby SWIFT and the bank transactions don't have the dominant volume anymore. It involves the launch of the gold trade note, which will start, I think, by China using it for Arab oil and African oil payments, not U.S. Treasury bills, not the dollar, not even RMB. The RMB is being used right now by the Saudis for Chinese oil sales, but they don't want to admit it because they don't want Langley terrorism.
Mm.
It's so sickening. If you're looking for the primary nodes across the globe of terrorism, the biggest one is Langley. And their offspring, their bastard child is ISIS.
But it's crazy because the Fed, they have a plan here for the remaining, I think, is it the rest of this year? They're going to try to increase rates twice by the end of this year? I think so. I think they scheduled two more. How? Yeah, why are they doing? It seems like that would be a suicidal move, right? Because if they increase rates two more times, we're looking at near inverted yield curves, correct?
We're already seeing inverted yield curves. We're seeing flat yield
on
curves
the two
and inverted yield curves.
Yeah, I'm saying on the 2 and 10s.
Why are they doing it? I think there are a few reasons. One is if they don't raise interest rates, there might be a global perception that the dollar is done in its rise. So there might be an abandonment of the dollar. I know that's kind of strange to swallow, but imagine that we just stay at 0.25% and don't change off that. Mm-hmm. All the rest of the world will be saying, we're not getting anything for our treasuries. Let's start dumping them. But now you're seeing them rise. So there's some incentive to stick with the treasury as a system. Mm-hmm. Okay? It's not very sound practice. I like to point that if you look at the headlines, you see, the Fed raised interest rates. Okay, fine. Are you going to read further, or are you going to stop at the headline? Okay, I don't stop at the headline. Mm-hmm. And that's why I sell a lot of subscriptions to the newsletter. Because the headline says that we're at full employment at 5%. You look down and you read that the participation rate has never been lower.
Right.
In other words, it's been higher. Okay, you got to read further down. I remember the first two rate hikes For the first rate hike, they raised a quarter, but they made some changes on the Fed repo rate, the Fed repurchasing rate. What they did was they made it easier for the Wall Street banks to hand over their treasury bonds, hand over their cash. I got that backwards. The Fed made it easier for the Wall Street banks to hand over their cash, receive treasuries, and go to a higher degree of leverage. So the Fed raised rates, but they made it possible for the Wall Street banks to leverage up even more on their bond portfolio by trying to encourage them to get rid of their cash. Okay, that's just dangerous stuff. It's like saying, well, we're going to make the Sears Tower 30% less footprint in the lobby, the foundation, and we're going to make it 50 stories higher. That's what they're doing with every single rate hike. They're doing, pardon me, they're doing some little switcheroo in the back, enabling the banks to manage the slightly higher interest rate, which on a marginal basis is not punishing. So they're allowing the banks to go with greater leverage and use their derivatives more fully to manage the system. Now, I think it's a combination of that and just avoiding the situation where the Treasury's are offering very, very, very small interest rate deals, which the world would say, let's get rid of our Treasuries because they're not paying us much of a yield. We can go to British bonds, we can go to Euro bonds, we can go to Japanese, no, not Japanese. We can go to, for a while it was Norwegian bonds, for a while it was Brazilian bonds. It'd be anything but U.S. Treasury bonds. The U.S. didn't want that. And now they're getting tired of the very severe criticism that we are not anywhere near the normalcy range of interest rates. When are we going to return to normalcy?
And normalcy is what, 5-6%, Jim? What is normal?
4.5.
4.5. Okay.
Right in there.
Okay.
The cost of money should not be free. If you make the cost of money, you encourage asset bubbles and misallocation where the entire economy is not working properly. I mean, imagine what would happen if your body suddenly sent 50% more blood to your arms and legs and much less to your brain.
Yeah.
Okay, we think, oh gosh, what a silly example. No, it's not a silly example. You would end up with bigger muscles, big legs, big arms, and you'd be an imbecile because you wouldn't be able to think very well.
So does that mean with the Fed increasing their rates, does that mean that we will see the equity markets turn over and start heading lower because, there won't be an incentive for these corporations to buy their stocks back with easy money, with cheap money?
The rest of the components say, well, that won't happen because the Fed is buying S&P stock index. Buying futures. Wall Street banks are buying S&P packages and S&P futures. What you're seeing as a result is certain breadth with a D, like broad, certain breadth indicators are showing that the major companies are doing well, but the smaller cap companies are
small
not.
cap, you're right. Small cap is lagging behind like big time. I saw that. Yeah,
Right.
I noticed that.
So the stock market roll over? Well, in what sense? Not from an S&P 500 sense.
I guess you're saying it's rolling over now then, right? We just, like you said, it's just the small caps.
They call the market internal, the VIX, the breadth indicators, the 52-week highs and lows. They're all looking up, but not the S&P. So American people are saying, well, I've got largely S&Ps investment for my funds for the IRA and 401ks, and we're doing fine. So they don't notice.
Right.
Are we going to come out of this? Yeah, but only after a crisis is encountered. And I think that crisis has already begun because we're seeing the United States exercised more sanctions against countries than ever in our history. We're seeing more crisis zones, I call them hotspots, where currency crises are occurring, like Turkey, Argentina, even Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. They're all experiencing currency crises. Iran.
India,
and what are they doing?
Yeah.
Economists in the West will say, oh gosh, they're all hurting, they're all going to hell. Well, no, they're going to be hurting until they react. Do Western economists ever factor in the feedback loop?
Mm-mm.
No, they don't. They always get it wrong, but they're paid well. But they're paid well to be wrong and support the dollar system. Iran is working feverishly with the Russians on oil deals to provide liquidity on Iranian sales to Russia. Now go figure that out. Why is Russia, the number one oil producer, buying Iranian oil? For the same reason they're buying Saudi oil, to produce liquidity and help those countries and win political favor. Iran is also turning around and having these huge import-export funded bank systems for managing the barter trade. It's much more sophisticated than it was 5 years ago. So Iran is turning to Russia and China, and they're going to become a cornerstone with significant energy production. The number one natural gas reserves in the world are in Iran. That's a little known fact.
Yeah, I didn't know
Syria
that.
has a bit too. Iran, number one. Okay, so the Western companies don't want to abide by the Washington sanctions regarding Iran because the European countries want some of this action in developing Iran's enormous natural gas reserves. Okay, so you're going to get the Germans in there, you're going to see India in there, you're going to see China in there to develop Iran's natural gas. Okay, this is just defiance. So it's a feedback reaction the Western economists don't factor in. They think, oh, Iran's going to go to hell forever because that's the straight line projection. I don't believe in any straight line projection. There's usually a U-turn after they see enough pain, after they experience enough hardship in their economy and their society. It starts to destabilize the political system, and the leaders start thinking, if we don't make some changes, we might be out of power through a revolution. Okay. Most revolutions come from starvation. Food. Okay, so I think Turkey and Iran are key. They're going to become cornerstones to the Eurasian trade zone.
Mm-hmm.
But this recent story about getting the cryptos for a minute. The petro is the name of a cryptocurrency for Venezuela, and I don't want to sing its praises too early because Venezuela really can't get out of its own way.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree, but you got to give them credit for trying, right? That's what I look at it as. I mean, it's a good effort for them to try to circumvent the U.S. system, the SWIFT system, and all of that, all of those sanctions and stuff that they impose on all these various countries. I think it's a good step in the right direction. And I posed this on my video the other day regarding the petro cryptocurrency because it's going to be backed by barrels of oil and also I think precious metals. I don't know what the basket of precious metals are, but
that elicited laughter from me because they pretty much sold all kinds of Goldman Sachs years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how they're forcing the citizens to use this new cryptocurrency. It actually went live on Monday. This is October. We're recording this October 3rd, but it went live on Monday. And so I'm just curious, where do you think the outcome of this petro is going to be? I mean, I don't think any countries outside of South America are going to, even in South America, they're probably not going to use it because they would fear having sanctions placed on them by the U.S., correct? So is it just an internal domestic type of thing to stave the hyperinflation?
It's a Maduro Caracas circle jerk. Okay, let me put the basics. You say the petro is backed by oil, Venezuelan oil. Are you aware that they cannot produce the oil?
No, I was not aware of that.
They cannot produce oil because they don't have liquidity necessary to buy Nigerian oil, which they did in the past, to mix with their heavy crude.
Okay, so they've got, I didn't know, they've got heavy crude over there. Okay, all right.
They cannot produce and sell their oil unless they mix it with imported oil. They don't have the money to import Nigerian oil anymore, so they shut down their oil production.
Interesting.
So cryptocurrency is backed by oil. Excuse me, where's your oil coming from? Okay, furthermore, who owns most of the Venezuelan oil business? It's not
Is it China?
Venezuela anymore. Right. Now, who is buying Venezuelan heavy crude? I believe Russian Rosneft is under contract, and I don't know if they've delivered any to Russia yet. Because it's too heavy, and there are other problems, and I think Russia is waiting for things to break down, and it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, waiting for it to get worse. And here's something that's very true of the Chinese. They're incredibly patient. So if the Chinese think, well, let's step in now, and then they think, well, if we step in 2 years, we'll be able to get a better bargain when things are more of a mess in Venezuela. So the creditors in Venezuela are China, and the buyers of oil are Russia, but Venezuela can't buy any oil from Nigeria, and now they launch a petro, and they can create all the rules and regs that they want. But so far, the crypto called Dash is winning.
Yeah.
Not the crypto petro.
Very true.
Now,
Very true.
You look at the last 10 or 15 years of history for Caracas, Venezuela, and their currency trading, you'll know that there were about 3 different tiers. The top tier, the official tier, was the nonsensical official trading rate for the Bolivar currency versus the dollar. And it received very little action. Didn't get zero action. I imagine that banks used it some in order to appear to participate, but the black market was something like 10 times the volume. And the black market was signaling that the Bolivar was worth 50% of what the official rate claimed.
Wow.
So it fell apart. You got the acceleration from multiple year pressure of 50% devaluation. And that's why it went so fast. It overshot. I like to hear about what's going on with the Caracas cup of coffee. You know, if you want to get out of Dodge in the United States and live in a tumultuous area where everything's quite cheap, go to Venezuela. They're a great example of what happens in a currency crisis for what the country does actually produce. They produce rice and beans, and there's a dire shortage of them right now because they export a lot of it, a lot more than they ever have. So if the United States experiences a currency crisis where the dollar is not accepted in many parts of the globe, you might see the United States suddenly working overtime to eliminate or vastly reduce their trade deficit by means of exporting what we can, which means we're going to export a lot of food and have food shortages in the United States. That's so we haven't gone through that phase yet. Trump announced that he wanted to do a reindustrialization and a $1 trillion infrastructure project, multiple year. Well, he never even started it. And I don't put full blame on Trump for never starting it, because he had to get various policies in place, and he had to fight the 80% fascist party dominance in the Congress. And right now, I'm hearing he has 53 votes for Kavanaugh, but he's not ready to force the vote yet for the Supreme Court appointment and confirmation. Even though he has 53 votes in the Senate, it's their job to confirm his appointment like that.
What are you speaking of
And
Trump? What do you think about him? There's reports that he's saying he may buy Italian bonds. What is that about?
I don't know.
You know,
Um, he might buy Italian bonds and what? Do an arbitrage of treasury bonds versus Italian
well, out of Bloomberg,
yield? I don't think so.
yeah,
Italian bonds are about to default. Italian banks are about to collapse. So that's just silly talk. I think he might have some kind of ulterior motive in there, saying that maybe the treasury bonds need to have a much higher yield instead of the 3%, maybe something like 5 or 7. But you got to be careful for what you wish, because if the U.S. long-term treasuries approach 5%, you're going to have derivative accidents and major banks in the West collapse. But I think that's going to happen. What we've had since 2008 has been I just saw a great quote. Whatever it was that broke the system in 2007 and 8, the U.S. Fed and the European central banks tripled down on for the same error.
yeah,
In other words, we made an error of having cheap money, poor underwriting, bad oversight for, say, bonds and the corruption involved. And instead of fixing it, we made it available not just to the U.S. mortgage finance market, we made it available to all the Western sovereign bonds and banks. That's what we've done the last 10 years. QE is nothing more than Zimbabwe, South American style hypermonetary inflation that's unsterilized. Now, I like to describe that because there are a lot of zip words in there. Hypermonetary inflation means you're printing money like you've never printed it before, multiples higher volume than anything before. That's hypermonetary inflation. Now, what is unsterilized? Well, in the past, in the 1970s and 1980s, there was plenty of Fed action. But if they wanted to support treasury bonds, they would do so with a simple zero-sum game.
mm-hmm.
They would buy a bunch of treasury bonds, but then in equal volume drain the banking system. The thousands of banks in the United States economy and under banking regulations. They would drain the equal volume for what they provided for purchase of treasuries. That's called sterilized. What we've been doing now since 2011 is unsterilized. We're not draining anything. We're making it available everywhere. So we've got what is sometimes called an everything bond bubble now. Sovereign bonds are now subprime. U.S. Treasury bonds are subprime. By that I mean we have very few buyers. We have huge increases in the deficit each year, and we have an economy in recession. Well, gosh, those are the conditions that we justified raising interest rates in Greece and forcing austerity their budget, but we don't do it in the United States. Okay, so we're doing the everything bond bubble. 2 years ago, the European Central Bank decided, well, we're just going to not just buy Italian bonds and Southern European bonds. We're going to buy corporate bonds across Europe. Well, that's not in their charter, but they thought that would sustain the system a little while longer. And the U.S. Fed, in the meantime, did some of that, but they did more emphasis on buying U.S. stocks and crude oil contracts. Okay, so the everything bond bubble is now turning into an everything finance easy money bubble. And I'm calling this a systemic layman event that's in progress. We're not just going to get the U.S. mortgage finance sector explode. We're going to get Western sovereign bonds and Western banking systems break down. And that's why I look for Deutsche Bank in Germany and the Italian banking system. I think that's a fuse that's already lit. And their utmost among the central banks to squirt water on that lit fuse so it doesn't continue and explode. And the water is just more liquidity. And you have tea now. It's a hot spot. I think will possibly become the first to go to a gold-backed currency. They've got a gold tradition of 1,000 years. They got some new Chinese and Russian background support. They got a desire to enter the BRICS, BRICS. They have a desire to expand their economy and participate more in the Eurasian trade zone. They have a desire to move away from the West a bit. Turkey could be very interesting. They're the site of a new arena. I think I can't remember the exact name they call it, but it's basically a gold trading center.
Mm.
And this trading center is formalizing some things, and it might turn out to be a great place to dump treasuries and buy gold bullion, or to dump euro bonds and to buy gold bullion. So Turkey is a very interesting point of inflection, I think. Iran has always been a point of inflection. They're not anywhere near as ignorant as Westerners think. I've only had the pleasure of meeting a few Iranians in my life. One is a contact of mine, an occasional source of mine. He's a client. He's in New York. He doesn't like his identity known well because he's in the New York banking system, and he slips me information once in a while, and he has great insights. Very smart guy, an Iranian fellow who was educated in the Western world. Okay. Another Iranian I met was skiing. I think it was about 1998. I was working at Staples. I went away occasionally on weekends to a bed and breakfast in western Maine so I could ski at Sunday River, my favorite spot. Sunday River, Maine. I think it had 5 mountains. 2 or 3 were kind of difficult. Nice. I'm an intermediate, somewhat advanced skier, but not anymore. It's been 20 years. But I used to ski a lot, and I met a nice guy in the bed and breakfast. We're just enjoying a little bit of hot cider and putting our feet up next to the fire. It's 0 degrees outside. The night is, and this guy was a biochemical engineer. He was doing engineering, DNA research, engineering of different diseases to do, disease therapy genetically. Very smart guy. And he said, Jim, why is it that Americans don't know anything about Iran, yet they hate us? I said, well, you're very independent and you don't like to abide by the dollar. It's kind of simple. He said, well, that may be, but you'd be amazed how many Iranians would like to get rid of our government. We don't like the mullahs. They steal a lot of money. He told me they've got a lot of Swiss bank accounts. Okay, so maybe that's why the West allows Iran to continue, because they park their money in Swiss banks and they allow us to have endless war. It's just crazy. So Iran is a good inflection point also. They're having tremendous amount of port construction to do trade with, I think, India and Turkey. I think they're going to be very big trading partners. And China has always been a big trading partner, but mostly in consumer goods, motorcycles, television, electrodomestics, they call it here, in return for oil and gas. I think a big piece coming up is going to be Russian influence in Iran. It's already happened. Russia now is the #1 agricultural exporter in the world. The United States is not. And with all the sanctions and trade tariffs, the U.S. is really falling back in trade volume for grains and agricultural goods. There was a while where a few ships were circling off Asian ports loaded with soybeans with nowhere to go. These are just snafus that happen from trade sanctions. But here's a very important point regarding trade sanctions. It's lifting the cost structure in the United States economy to the point where it might encourage more new business to begin in the United States.
Yeah.
And I think it's done in the free trade zone. So, if you increase by 10 or 20% the cost structure, you increase the potential for profit for newly formed U.S.-based companies. And I've been saying for the longest time, you need to reduce the income tax. The United States has the highest corporate income taxes in the world, and it's very poorly understood by the American public.
You see what the temporary tax cuts have done so far that Trump has put into place, I mean, it has definitely spurred economic activity and growth within the small business sector. But it's like a double-edged sword though, because we're so in debt. How do we continue these tax cuts and repair our debt? I know we're never going to do that, but I'm just saying the perceived it's all about the perceived health of the United States, like to other countries. So if we continue to go into debt, how do we do that and cut taxes at the same time to spur growth?
We got to get rid of the real obstacles to business creation. And one is the high wage. Another is the high overhead for workers.
Mm-hmm.
By that, workers' compensation, health benefits, pension contribution or assistance, things like that. But we need to get rid of the federal regulations. If we're approaching a third world status, we need to adopt third world environmental standards.
Oh man, that's a good one.
Well, it's logical. We need to relax on stringent environmental controls and policies so that companies can hire more people, export more, and the negative side, will be we have more pollution. We need to get rid of the onerous OSHA worker safety requirements. Mm-hmm. Again, make it a little bit more like the third world competitors. We need to compete with the third world by adopting some of their policies. Mm. We also need to do the free trade zones, and they're just loaded with incentives. I think it was about 3 years ago I gave an example of an Alabama company with about 30 or 40 employees making copper tubing, copper pipes and tubing, and 40% of it was exported to China. And they had incentives in the Alabama Free Trade Zone, which is sponsored by the state legislature. They have property tax forgiven for 3 years and no income tax for 3 years. I say make it 5. Make it across all 50 states. Make it a federal inducement in some way. And encourage foreign investment in the United States. There's a lot of talk that Trump has recovered stolen Fort Knox gold and has plans to seize a lot of elite assets to cover a good portion of the $21 trillion in debt.
Interesting.
And I'm saying, sounds good, but you got to put the feet to the fire a little more effectively than the Saudis did, because they talked about recovering $600 or $800 billion from crooked Arab royals and businessmen, and instead they didn't even get $100 billion. So Trump is doing his dead level best with the omnibus bill, which is kind of like a national RICO law. Let me just make the distinction. If you're a criminal organization and you use your profits to buy big yachts, some Gulfstream aircraft, and beachside mansions, and then you get arrested and they can prove that you bought the yachts and the beachside mansions and more with illicit profits, it can all be seized by the U.S. government under the RICO law. Racketeering, I don't know what the I is, and corruption organization. Racketeering, integrated, something like that. It's RICO, R-I-C-O. Well, the omnibus bill goes much further, and it describes a number of different crimes and states that if a person is guilty of any subset of these very hostile crimes, then their entire asset base could be confiscated. Not just the portion purchased with criminal profit. And if you're wondering, well, what are these crimes that are so horrible? Well, they're like child trafficking, mass murder of children, drug trafficking, bond fraud in the trillions, and stolen gold from Fort Knox, among other places. Okay, that class of crime. A few weeks ago, we had an incident where John McCain supposedly died suddenly of cancer. For a minute, and neither apparently did Ohio Governor Kasich believe it, because on CNN he said it's only been 24 hours since Senator McCain was put to death. So when I heard all that, I was wondering, pardon me, what exactly were the crimes that John McCain committed? I can imagine it might have been terrorism as a key link to the ISIS terrorists in Syria. Okay, that might have been one, but then I heard, oh my gosh, he was one of the main ringleaders for child trafficking to supply the Satanists for their ritual killing. Okay, so they got him on something more important than ISIS terrorism complicity. They got him in mass murder of children. Okay, these are the kind of crimes that omnibus bill apply to. Now, I don't know if Trump's going to be able to confiscate several trillion. He might. I don't know. I don't know what he's up to. He doesn't really give away the theme of the 45,000 sealed indictments, but I've heard that about 500 have been opened. So less than 1,000 have been opened. We're talking about about 1% of the sealed indictments have been opened. We got a long way to go on this game.
Yeah.
So I'd like to focus on 3 requirements for getting out of our mess financially. We need to eliminate our 21 trillion in U.S. government debt.
Mm-hmm.
We need to source gold to cover a new currency that's gold-backed, new gold-backed dollar. We need something like 10 or 15,000 tons. And third, and very important, you cannot leave this out, most economists do, we need to eliminate the trade deficit so that whatever we back the new dollar by doesn't get forfeited in the first 2 years.
So I have a question though on your first point about eliminating the debt. Wouldn't that, because we're in a debt-based system, wouldn't that just completely crash everything? If we eliminate the debt, then it wouldn't work. Or are you saying that we would transition out of this whole system?
I didn't say get rid of the debt-based system. I mean, you're not going to get out of the system where corporations rely on credit.
Right.
And small businesses rely on credit in order to, say, cover inventory for a short period. That's all critical. That's all positive use of credit.
Okay.
But what the U.S. government has done is permitted multi-trillion-dollar missing funds, like Fannie Mae, selling to Israel entire weapon systems for the cost of scrap metal, which means a 97% price discount. What the United States has done is it's spent $1.3 trillion a year on Medicare and Medicaid. How many Americans are aware that we spend $1.3 trillion a year on Medicare and Medicaid? I didn't talk about Social Security.
Yeah.
Medicare. My father had an incident several years ago where he had a kidney failure.
Mm-hmm.
And since we were 90, it all got covered by Medicare. And I asked him a month later, Dad, whatever happened to the cost for all that? He said, Jim, it was incredible. 10 days in the hospital, it was like $31,000, $28,000, something like that. I said, and that got covered? He said, oh, Jim, it's all covered by Medicare. I said, oh my gosh, so you're part of the $1 trillion deficit for Medicare. He said, well, I don't know, but I'm doing better. Okay, so on an individual basis, no one gives a shit. On a macro collective basis, it's $1.3 trillion a year. I actually looked up. I wanted to get my figures right. I looked it up. I went to a government website. It was 600 something for Medicare. It was $630 billion for Medicaid. 1.3 trillion dollars every year. So look for Trump to cut back on that and do some Social Security reform. I think the Social Security reform is going to be quite interesting and full of debate and a lot of rancor. I mean, a lot of anger. I talked with a very smart buddy of mine in Boston. He shared with me some wisdom, and it was backed up with very parallel points made by one of my jackass colleagues. The Social Security reform is going to, I think, play out kind of like this. they're going to raise the eligibility age for people who are years old. They're going to raise the eligibility age just a little bit for people who are maybe around 60. They're going to leave everything alone for people who've been collecting Social Security for over 10 years. They might give them 10% less. For someone who's been in the Social Security system for only a couple of years, they might get a small reduction of like 15%. For those who are yet to enter, but are near, like within 5 years of entering, they're going to have to wait an extra year, and they're going to have to get a little bit less, like 20% less on the payout. For those who are more than 5 years away from entering, they're going to have to wait an extra 3 years, and they're going to be looking at 25% less payout. So basically what they're going to do is raise the eligibility age, lower the payout, and I left out the big piece. Everybody's going to pay more into it.
Yeah, I can see that. What do you think about universal basic income? That was a topic that I wanted to bring up as well. Is that something that you see being a possibility as well that the U.S. implements?
I don't really think so. It sounds a lot like crazy stuff of debt jubilee.
Yeah, it does.
All right, so the elite in this world are going to release, let's just say, $50 trillion to eliminate poverty. Yeah, right. Okay, here's the funny part. The people in control of $50 trillion, take a close look at their lives. Let's just bring up one, for example, one little group, Monaco, the Principality of Monaco. Very few people realize that they're making tens of billions of dollars a year in narco money trafficking and narcotics chemical processing. That's right, Monaco, the Principality of Monaco. Okay, here's my point.
I didn't know that.
If you put together all the, let's just say there are 2,000 elites who own 50 trillion, what you might find is that 3/4 of them are involved in very, very serious criminal activity. Now, are they likely to have assets seized? I don't know. Does the king of Monaco or the prince, whatever the title is right now, I don't know, is that person vulnerable? Is that monarch vulnerable? I don't know. Is Interpol all over them like white on rice for processing narcotics? I don't know. Be worried because the McCain execution was a signal that the times are changing. There are a lot of rumors out there about what the next stage is. There are several, the list of U.S. senators and representatives from Congress who've been forced into resignations and retirement. What is it? 30 people long? 40 people long? What are they involved in? We don't know. We're not told. It's part of a sealed indictment. Now, here's the beauty of a sealed indictment. It has value, not being unsealed. You got a sealed indictment. Let's just make up something. Like former VP candidate Paul Ryan. I think he's a representative from Wisconsin. I don't know if he's still in the Senate, still in the House or not. Let's just. I don't keep up with all the details of the U.S. Congress and the fascist state. Let's just assume that Ryan is still operating, or he's under a promise to not run for re-election when his term is over. That's another deal. Resignation, I'll serve out my term, or I'll resign immediately and go into hiding and get replaced by the state governor. If the indictment is unsealed, then that person can bargain. They call it plea bargaining. They call it turning state's evidence. They call it working toward immunity and making a contract. What they might do is they might give up higher level figures and might give up information, data, bank records, conversations that are taped, videos. It could be Could be email, could be letters, could be various forms of communication to implicate, say, let's just say, someone who's running the Clinton Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone who's the U.S. administrator for the Clinton Foundation. Something like that. It's a Canadian foundation. It's very clever. So the unsealed indictment has value in converting, flipping, and working a deal. Let's say it's not Ryan. Let's say it's a business member, someone in Exxon, a middle-level person who's board member. A middle-level executive in Exxon or a board member.
Mm-hmm.
That person might have unbelievable evidence about Rockefeller Institute with lots of data, lots of damning evidence, and the person, let's just say the person's worth $2.5 billion. They cut a deal with the Trump administration to hang on to $1 billion. A lot of evidence is provided, and it manages to bring about 60 more indictments that are also unsealed against very powerful elite people who are involved in sabotaging the country. That's where the unsealed indictment has value. It has value in compromise and bargaining.
Mm.
They can retain a portion of their wealth. If the guy in Exxon goes from $2.5 billion to $1.0 billion, he will not miss a meal.
Right.
He will still hang on to a couple boats. He will still have a vacation in this Florida condo. He will still go to Switzerland and maybe be an attendee at the Davos Economic Forum. By the way, that is not an economic forum, it's a banker barbecue. The St. Petersburg, Russia conference is an economic conference. They actually sign business deals, huge amount of business deals, every September, to the envy of Davos, which signs 0 business deals every year. And I'm real curious what they do in the basements there in the evening, and whether little children are put to death. So, anyway, I have a lot of optimism on what Trump is. I am not a Pollyanna type to think that Trump is all good. I think he's got one foot in the swamp.
Yeah, same here. I feel the same way.
He would not have been enabled to win the White House if he had no foot in the swamp.
Mm-hmm.
And proof is that Goldman Sachs is still running the Department of Treasury. Proof is that he still allows the military to expand the budget and continue with their endless wars. That's the proof. So the Pentagon and Wall Street are the groups that he's beholden to. And you really need to watch those two relationships with respect to Trump to see what's really going on. And there's not a lot of information about it. I think there's a news blackout. For instance, if he has a big fight with the Goldman Sachs guy because he wants to get in the way of a 5-year plan to go back to the gold standard, and he wants to fire the Goldman Sachs VP, but Blankfein and a couple of others prevent it from happening, and Trump has a yelling match that a lot of people overheard, and someone wants to put it in the New York Times, but it can't. We just don't hear about it. Very interesting conflicts. Yeah. I think Trump actually does something extremely clever. He lets the enemies in his room, in his cabinet, he lets them get stupid so that they fail.
Mm.
And then he's left with fewer adversaries in his own room of cabinet officers. And right now, I think Sessions is failing.
Mm-hmm.
The Justice Department head, the Attorney General. I think he's been let to fail because I think Sessions was forced on him. If you want to keep at bay a lot of the prosecutions, which say Hillary and various people in the FBI and whatever, you bring in one of the swamp creatures at the Attorney General's site and you order him, do nothing. Your job is to do nothing. Just get in the way of everything. That's what Sessions has been. And Trump didn't fight it. He just wants time to be Sessions' enemy. So everybody else says, Sessions, you're not doing anything. Where have you been for 3 years, 2 years? And then you start getting pressure for more prosecution. And Trump didn't do anything. That's what he wants. He wants the action to come from the system when Trump doesn't do anything. Mm-hmm. He wants a reaction to get things done. Very clever strategy. Remember, he's a business expert. And don't dismiss him for having gone through bankruptcy, because that could be more the business cycle than his lousy decision.
Right. Right.
But we don't have a business cycle anymore. This is a good point to end on. We don't have a business cycle anymore. It doesn't matter that we're in a recession. All we have is a credit cycle. That's the only thing that's important. Credit cycle is critical, and when the credit cycle turns down, you're going to have bankruptcies, you're going to have defaults, you're going to have banking systems fail, you're going to have banks fail, not just in North America, not just the United States. We're in the downward cycle, downward movement within the credit cycle right now. And its main marquee headlines are Fed tightening.
Yeah. So how does this play? How does everything that we've discussed today? How do cryptos play into this? Just kind of wrapping up here. We've been in a bear market this year, 2018. I think a lot of people in the crypto space are like worried, and they're pulling their hair out. I'm like, look, guys, in 2017 we had almost like 1,400% return on Bitcoin. Like, calm down. It's not over. But I'm just curious to get your commentary, Jim, on cryptos and where you see that playing into things going forward.
Okay, first of all, I think cryptos have a very big role coming up in the disintermediation of the financial sector. Fancy words. What it means is the financial services and functions offered by cryptos are going to put a lot of banks out of business. They're going to undercut the bank role where let's just make up a good example. Not make up. Let's just pose a good example. A Wall Street bank and bond issuance for medium-sized companies, not big, medium-sized company bond issuance. That might all be done and handled by means of crypto, where Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs aren't involved anymore, and they don't get their 7% cut. But instead, the crypto function works, and the cut goes to the crypto, let's just say functional coin owners, and they realize a 3% gain. Every time there's if you devote a portion of the crypto base for that particular function, and it is involved in a bond issuance from a mid-sized company, it realizes a 3%, not a 7% Wall Street, but a 3% crypto gain, then that portion of the crypto base sees the 3% gain, and the overall price of that crypto goes up. That's an example of the disintermediation of the financial industry. Now, there's a whole lot more, like small business lending, and I think populists will be important in that. There are so many more different functions. One is where can I get registered my property titles, my passport information, my bank account information, my social security number, and for all of the executives to the company, all their financial data. Well, there's a company called Pillar that specializes in that, and I think that's going to be a rather important functional token crypto. Small business lending is going to be a very big issue. Talk about disintermediating the banks. You don't go to a bank and lay out your financial portfolio and all of your books, hiding your second book. You don't deal with all that. Instead, you work with some crypto owners, and you get yourself a loan, and the payback in interest goes directly toward the owners of that functional token cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
Disintermediation of small business loans, disintermediation of mid-sized corporate bond issuance, that's just for starters. Okay, my point that I like to focus on a lot, and this is straight off one of the smartest guys I've got in my jackass colleague. He's also a crypto expert, and he's done extraordinarily well with that. And I leave out details, he's done extraordinarily well. My best source of information on crypto has been Sky Crane, the jackass colleague, for the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
He says to me, Jim, the role of crypto will not be asset appreciation for the coins used as cash. The game will be in asset appreciation for the crypto coins that have function. He calls them functional token cryptos.
Mm-hmm.
Token cryptos, or just cryptos that serve a function.
Mm-hmm. Utility.
Like lending or invoicing. Populous is for invoicing. Pillar is for title management organization. So Bitcoin, I don't think you're going to see the tenfold gain in the future.
Right.
I think you're going to see moderate gains, like maybe doubling or tripling in the next several years.
Right.
But I'm worried for the concentration of Bitcoin wealth in the hands of something like 100 people. They own something like 90% of Bitcoins. 100 people own 90% of crypto Bitcoin. I don't think that's a healthy situation. Something weird about that.
Yeah, I agree.
I call in January, February, when I heard that the CME was about to come out with a Bitcoin futures contract.
Mm-hmm.
I made you're going to see a 60% decline in Bitcoin. How'd that work out? The answer is it worked out very well. It's not a forecast I enjoyed seeing because I believe that a couple of factors are behind it. I think they're willy-nilly shorting Bitcoin in the Chicago CME, but they're also doing a lot of sinister things through Wall Street banks. They're shorting it. They're putting out false news. They're putting out smear stories. They're watching it go down and they cover. I think the downward decline is pretty much done, but the big upside coming is going to be from various functional crypto coins.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Yeah, the utility tokens are going to be definitely the future.
Well, imagine the whole need for doing peer-to-peer payment. That's not necessarily a functional token. It might be in just the way they pull it off. I don't pretend to be an expert in this, but for payment systems, we're going to see some new clever token types created.
So
I've got a contact in America who's a real pro of this, and I don't want to mention the name of it. Maybe in another show.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned something like I talked about ant shares and it went up 20-fold.
Yeah.
I might have been responsible for one of the 20.
Right. Ant shares, by the way, guys, is now known as NEO for viewers to understand. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm concerned about the concentration. I'm concerned about the CME. I think that the Bitcoin futures contract should be eliminated. And if it's not eliminated, it should have Bitcoin owners doing the regulatory oversight.
Or at least settled in Bitcoin, right? The sad thing is that these contracts they're all cash only, to be more specific. So that just makes it even worse.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot more points that I could make regarding Bitcoin, but I'd rather leave it there, honestly. I'm not an expert in crypto. I'm a student in crypto. I do believe that blockchain has an enormous future. I don't think its future is entirely subject within the cryptocurrency currency base. I'm much more interested in the crypto money concept, where cryptocurrencies are going to be backed by silver, gold, diamond, platinum, and crude oil. I'm watching closely the petro in Venezuela, but it's coming out of a toxic, acidic, politically corrupt swamp.
So what are your thoughts, speaking of cryptos being backed by, now there's very popular now, Jim, is the stable coins. They're called stable coins. So they're cryptocurrencies backed by fiat dollars. What are your thoughts on that whole situation? Jim and I just came out with one. We've got Trust USD and USDT, which is Tether. What are your thoughts on stable coins, if any?
I think they're worthless. Does that answer your question?
You said they're worthless?
They're worthless. What are they backed by?
Fiat worthless currency. Yeah.
Okay. What is Bitcoin backed by? It's backed by electronic work.
Mathematics. Yeah. Cryptography.
What is BitShares worth? What are they backed by if their value has an underlying foundation of fiat currency, which is worthless?
I guess my question is, do you see the stable coins being a source for liquidity in this new age, in this new market?
Well, yeah, in a utility in the form of peer-to-peer payments, but I think there are going to be much better forms out there.
Okay.
Peer-to-peer payment has more reliability. That might not have missing money for a transaction.
Right.
That might not have heavy fees to cover fraudulent enterprise. It might not have a lot of very weird elements to it. They're going to be better forms of crypto cash.
Yeah.
And I'm looking to see about these peer-to-peer payment systems, like my Latin American contact. I don't even want to give away what country he's in. I want to know more about that. Find out how is that any different from, say, Bitcoin Cash. Now, there's no reason for Bitcoin Cash to double and triple in value. It's a medium of exchange electronically, behind the walls.
Yeah.
Behind the big Swift walls.
Right.
So, this is a wide open game. But watch the blockchain technology become important. And let's see if we get certain things like government weapons contractors being forced into blockchain to prove validation and absence of fraud. Okay, that sort of thing.
Wow, I didn't think about that. That's a good one.
It's a document registry. How about titles for U.S.-based households that are involved in mortgage bonds?
Yeah, Proppy is doing that. Proppy, check out Proppy when you get a chance. That's a good one. They've actually done a couple of deals in California already.
How do you spell Proppy?
P-R-O-P-Y.
Okay, Proppy.
Yeah, they're doing well with that. But yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Well, back 13 years ago, we were dealing with the MERS fraudulent title database.
Yeah.
Where Wall Street was using it and surreptitiously using individual titles with 2 and 3 different mortgage bonds. And they never paid the price of criminal convictions or fines or penalties or anything. No Wall Street executive went to jail for anything having to do with that whole era of fraud. I'm talking about multiple trillion-dollar fraud. So that's an element of a fascist state. Sign up for a Hetrick letter, and you can read my page-long example of what has turned out to be fascist state symptoms for the United States. Very, very ugly. And the news networks, that's another Trump plan coming up. He's got supposedly in October. We're in October. I heard the 20th of October, something like that. I don't really know. But it's a truth in news legislation that enables lawsuits for slander, libel, and just basic lying in the press.
Wow, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, well, I'd like to see CNN forced into divestiture.
Yeah. Yeah, Clinton News Network.
Oh, that's good. I have not heard. Have not heard.
Yeah, no, this is great. I appreciate your time, Jim. Go ahead and tell the audience where they can find you and how to sign up for your newsletter. Great newsletter, going on 15 years now.
It's www.goldenjackass.com. Started in May of 2004. This month, I looked at the calendar. I just took the month and add a number. It's up to 171.
Wow.
Sorry, 170. I read that badly. I need glasses.
Well, yeah, Jim, I'm glad you came on, and we'll definitely have you come on again in the future here, maybe after the new year, after some new things come about. I'm excited for the future. I think, as you stated, Trump is not perfect, but I see the effort, and I'm giving him an A for effort, for sure.
If you allow me, I've got 3 compliments that I love. One is, I was listening to your free podcast for a long time, and I finally signed up, and I wish I'd signed up a year ago. Another is, I used to be a Handpick Letter subscriber, and I gave up in 2014. I'm back, and I wish I'd never left. And when I just started getting, I've had about 3 of these in the last few months. My newsletter subscription was canceled, and it's been only about a month, but I'm signing back on because I can't live without it. Those are nice things to hear. I've got 10 Jackass colleagues that come from all around the world. I mean that. One in London, one with Turkish, Iran, and India background. One is working in the Middle East. One is living in South America. And one's in Canada. Two are Canadian. And one guy lives down here with me. And we get together for a month. So I hope people can bounce around in goldenjackass.com and sign up for the newsletter, because what we're seeing now is a collapse of the king dollar system, the petrodollar de facto standard. And we're also seeing a collapse of a debt abuse system. The whole foundation, financial foundation in the West, has debt. It's crazy, upside down. There used to be a joke when I got out of graduate school that credit access is wealth. Well, that's kind of a corollary to debt is money.
Yeah,
and
right.
The gold standard makes everything honest, and the elite in control of the Western world do not want control for honest money. But it's going to be a bit ironic, that I believe what we're going to see is a bank for international settlements, which controls the whole franchise system of